Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and another sneak peek behind the music. Today I want to tell you a little bit about my experience recording my first album, Cardboard Boxes, and to think about the lessons I want to extract from that experience, especially as I'm working on all this new material that will be released this year. For those of you who are new to my channel and new to my music, I'm Dora Donaldson. I'm a singer-songwriter and currently living in Malaysia, and I'm documenting the process behind writing, recording, and releasing new material this year. And with each update, I want to show you a different side of life in KL and in Malaysia, lockdown or otherwise. So if you want to stay up to date with that, then hit the subscribe button and the bell icon, and that way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video and also new music. I've set up camp on the floor today. We're in a new lockdown, so this is just kind of how I keep things spicy at the moment. I'm finding different parts of the house to work in, and today this is my spot. So I also want to tell you guys a little bit more about what's going on in Malaysia. Since my last video, we've gone into a full lockdown. I'll come back to that in more detail a bit later, but obviously it's not very easy. Obviously, it's been a really difficult year for everybody all over the world, and just a difficult few weeks coming up in Malaysia as well. But since I have some time now, I thought it would be a good opportunity to tell you guys a story about my first album, talk a little bit more about my relationship with songwriting and how I got into it in the first place, and show you what it's like to be in full lockdown here in KL. Obviously, the biggest impact for us at the moment is this full lockdown. So it's FMCO, full movement control order. It's scheduled for the next 6 weeks, and we've already had 2 weeks of kind of pseudo lockdown. So it's pretty tough. It's quite surreal. Everything is closed. Pretty much only the supermarket and pharmacy is open. Even the parks are closed, which is pretty tough. We definitely took advantage of the weekend before the lockdown to walk around as much as possible, spend as much time outside as possible, enjoy the parks. A couple of streets away from us, there's this area called Kampung Baru. It literally translates to new village, and it's a really cozy neighborhood, sort of nestled right next to the city center. So it's a fascinating contrast, and we really like spending time there. So we go quite often on the weekends. So we went as well a couple weekends ago and supported some of the local street food by eating as much as we possibly could. KL is such a dynamic city. We've been very lucky to experience it even somewhat back to normal for a couple of months, and so it's just quite sad to see it grind to a halt again. And now our priority is just to try to stay sane and get through these next few weeks. We've already cut each other's hair and we're in week 1, so I'm a little bit nervous about what's to come for the next 5 weeks, but trying to stay optimistic and positive, trying to stay hopeful that we'll be able to see our families at some point this year. I think that's really difficult for a lot of people here. You know, even within Malaysia, interstate travel hasn't been allowed all year, so many people have not seen their families for a really long time, and that's really difficult, as it has been for everybody all over the world. Ultimately, I'm here to talk about my music and our experience here in KL, so I don't want to get too COVID heavy, and I actually try to not think about it as much as possible, but there comes a time, especially in lockdowns, where it's just impossible to ignore because it really influences every single second of your day. So I don't want to philosophize about it too much, but at the same time, as a songwriter or as anyone who writes, creates, whether you're a photographer, filmmaker, artist, or even in advertising, right? What you're doing is you're observing your experiences, you're observing other people's experiences, and then you weave those into stories, and what bigger experience at the moment than all of this, and it sort of ends up kind of framing everything that you do. When I take a step back and observe what's going on now, what I see is that there's this thing that's had tremendous impact on every single one of us, no matter where you are or who you are. It has affected you in one way, shape, or form. It's had enormous costs, not just in terms of lives, but livelihoods, and the kind of psychological cost, or that human cost, of isolating people from other human beings and separating ourselves from the things that maybe help bring meaning to our lives. And I think that is also a cost. We have this huge event in common, and we're experiencing it in such different ways. Some people really feel like we did too much. Some people think we didn't do enough. My hope would be that we could have really objective, honest, non-politicized, non-tribalist conversations about the real costs and benefits of some of the measures that we've implemented, and to really look at the impact, not just of the virus in itself, which I think is one thing, but also our reactions to the virus, because I think those are two very different conversations. On my more skeptical days, the reason I don't think we're going to be able to have that conversation is because we already experience the world so differently. People experience life differently. I mean, that's like the obvious statement of the year, but it means that we kind of tend to have these different attitudes anyway, and then something like COVID just sort of amplifies that, right? So people have different risk perceptions, people react to risk differently, people have different thresholds for how much control they're willing to accept, people have different definitions for what gives meaning to their lives or what it means to sacrifice, to adapt, to survive. I also just feel like maybe we shouldn't be so disheartened about the fact that we're experiencing this in different ways. I feel like that's pretty normal, and it would actually be kind of weird if everyone agreed all the time. So there's all these complex kind of philosophical questions underpinning so many of our conversations, and I think that's what we're seeing play out. And as a songwriter, my experiences 100% influence what I write about. So it's been a fascinating backdrop to take that step back and observe not only my feelings about it and how they've fluctuated throughout the whole story, but also how other people are experiencing the same event in a very different way. So definitely not an easy few weeks in Malaysia, but trying to stay productive, which is also not that easy because a lockdown this scale obviously puts a lot of things on hold. Like the music video, for example, we can't do anything. We can't even meet with the team because we live in different districts. So we just kind of have to wait and see, but I'm trying to do what I can. I'm working really closely with the studio still, so we've actually switched to remote working through Zoom, and I was pretty skeptical of how that was gonna work, especially when you're kind of trying to listen to a mix and a master in real time. But I have to say that I was really pleasantly surprised, and hats off to the studio for that. So I'm working with Mile High Sounds here, and I think because they do a lot of remote teaching and music production, they're just very well equipped and have a lot of experience doing this. So it was a very seamless transition, and I really appreciate that because it means that we can keep working on the songs. The other thing that I can do with the studio in the next 6 weeks is really hammer down the release strategy. So we've been talking a lot about how we want to approach it, and I obviously have to think about my lessons from my first album and what are the things that I think I did right and what are the things that I think I did wrong, and how I would like that to influence what happens with these next batch of songs. I think this is also the time for me to kind of really think about what my ultimate goal is with my music, how I would like it to evolve, and what my relationship to it is, and what that means moving forward. And so since I'm reflecting on that quite a bit at the moment, I thought what a great chance to share that with you guys and let you know a little bit about how I even kind of came into songwriting. So I come from quite a musical family. I studied classical music kind of growing up, and I was in choir, and then sort of moved into musical theater as I got a bit older. And I was always writing little snippets of songs, like kind of just goofy little melodies or just narrating what was happening. And as I got a bit older, they became a little bit more coherent. And one day after school in high school, I guess I was waiting for theater rehearsals to start, and I found a piano, and I was playing a song that I had recently written, and my math teacher at the time heard me and came in, and we started talking about songwriting. And as a musician and songwriter himself, he very enthusiastically set up a course for me and a bunch of other students to teach us the basics of songwriting. And so that definitely helped evolve my songwriting into something a bit more conscious, a bit more coherent, and a bit more deliberate. So music starts to become this kind of quiet force in the background in my life, and it wasn't really at the forefront at that stage. I was studying psychology and economics. I eventually became a graphic designer, but it was always this kind of quiet passion, and eventually I sort of built up a very humble catalog of songs. And so I decided to call a studio and just see, is there something here? And if so, what? And if then how does this kind of turn into something that people can actually listen to? And I was in Zurich at the time, so I called Sonar Sound Studios and I met with Philip Ed in there. And that was just one of the best decisions and a real turning point for me, because from a music production side, I couldn't have been happier with it. Philip did a wonderful job capturing what I was trying to say, and the session musicians that worked on that album were just phenomenal. I couldn't have asked for a better combination, and that was really important to me. I wanted to have a really good product. I wanted it to be very polished. I wanted the production to be excellent, and I feel like I absolutely got that. So I'm so grateful to the people that I was working with to have kind of achieved that and actualized that into something tangible. But in a way, because I was so fixated on making sure I had a really polished product, I think I kind of forgot to think about how to market it properly. And I was learning the ins and outs of how to sort of get music released. And it's quite overwhelming when you've never done it before. And so I think just a lot of my bandwidth was taken up from that when I should have been concentrating on other things as well. And although I'm quite extroverted in a lot of ways, I really struggled with the idea of self-promotion. And at that time I kind of thought, well, so long as I have a good product and it's good quality production, I don't really need to do this like icky self-promotion. And obviously that's not the case. And I think this struggle to overcome the aversion for self-promotion was a mistake. And I think that I should have done more, and I shouldn't have let it hold me back so much. And at the same time, I think the reason that I struggled as well is because at that time I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go in, and the music industry is huge, and so you're sort of like inundated with all these different options. And because I didn't have a clear picture in my mind, I think I was absolutely kind of pinging all over the place. And at the same time, I was making some really kind of critical mistakes. So for example, my artist name was a huge disaster because my last name at the time was Smoji. It's a Hungarian last name. I absolutely love it. I have a lot of attachment to it, but it's difficult to pronounce, and I was not in my home country. So I struggled with whether or not to include it in my artist name. And at the same time, I didn't want to have a stage name because I was like, oh, I'm a singer-songwriter. Like I want to be authentic to myself, blah, 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 blah. And so I ended up kind of panicking about it and then just going with Dora. And that was the stupidest thing ever, because then when people are searching for you, you are not only competing with Dora the Explorer, but you're competing with the millions of other Doras in the world. I released this album in 2013, and this was kind of at the time where digital streaming really kind of completely took over. But the kind of checklist I was using was still geared towards a lot of things that were very analog, and this is gonna make me sound absolutely ancient, but that checklist still kind of included ordering hard copies of your CD, of your album. And so I still have hard copies of this album that basically became irrelevant overnight. And at the same time, things that would have been really important, like being searchable on digital platforms with my artist name, were a total disaster, right? So I would be doing live performances and you couldn't kind of translate that into any sort of digital following, because when people are going to search for you, they can't find you. And it turns out that it's quite difficult to change your artist name. So basically what you have to do is you have to cancel your whole catalog and resubmit it as a new work. And you have to make sure that all the metadata and everything matches. Otherwise you might get flagged as like a copyright infringement of your own thing. And that system is kind of there to protect you as an artist, but obviously makes changing your artist name quite difficult. I was so worried that by trying to change my artist name, something would go wrong and I would accidentally kind of block myself from ever being able to release these songs again. And instead of dealing with it, I kind of just neglected that whole aspect of my music, which was a really stupid thing to do. And eventually I realized it was just something that I had to fix, because then every other effort that I was putting into my music was kind of negated by this issue of the artist name. And so when we arrived in Malaysia and we were doing our 10-day quarantine, I took that time to finally sort this issue out once and for all. I resubmitted everything as Dora Donaldson, and so it's my married name. It has a nice ring to it, and most importantly, there's no other artist with that name. But it means that I'm now searchable. It's made my life infinitely easier, and it also means that I can now kind of work on filling in the gaps of where I maybe neglected a lot of my digital presence, and sort of experiment with some of my old catalog there, building up, lyric videos, building up my YouTube channel, working on getting those songs on Spotify playlists. And I'm sort of experimenting with all these different things with the old catalog, so that by the time I have new material, I have a lot more experience under my belt. A lot of artists feel quite strongly about how digital streaming platforms have sort of changed music, and I think a lot of the criticisms are valid. And at the same time, I can't help but notice that these platforms have also done wonders for sort of democratizing music as well. And so it's quite an interesting double-edged sword in a way, because you have all these tools available to you, and it's never been easier to be an independent artist. And at the same time, the competition is huge, and you're also still inundated with all these different opportunities. You have to do a lot of research and make sure that, you know, you're focusing your energy on the right things. And I think one of the biggest changes for me since my last album to now is that I now know the direction that I want to go into. So I know that it's really kind of the songwriting that is the most interesting for me, and that helps narrow my focus as well on what opportunities I want to pay attention to. So I definitely made some mistakes, but I also don't want to be too hard on myself, because I think I did some things right as well. I was doing regular performances, probably not as often as I should have, but I was working full time as well. So I'm gonna cut myself some slack there, but I was gigging regularly and kind of taking any opportunity that I could to perform. And I played with a lot of different musicians and 2 different bands at one time. I was submitting to a lot of songwriting competitions and getting a lot of good feedback on my songs and kind of getting through to semi-finalist rounds. And then I won a songwriting competition with my song Perfect for one of the biggest radio stations in Hungary, Petőfi Radio, and so they featured my song and they did an interview. And then Perfect and my other song Cardboard Boxes, they were on Swiss radio, so I think Perfect was on SRF 1 and Cardboard Boxes was on Radio 1 for like 6 months. And so there was definitely kind of momentum and interest, and I think I just need to harness that a lot better this time around. Another thing that I think I did well was that I kept writing a lot. So I was writing with different musicians and different producers, also sort of in different genres of music. So sort of getting out of my singer-songwriter comfort zone. And I learned a lot from those experiences. And so I really want to kind of make sure that I keep doing that and keep writing, and also sort of keep challenging myself as a writer. Now that I'm also a lot clearer with the direction that I want to take my music, I'm hoping it'll also be easier for me to sort of overcome this aversion for self-promotion and instead really think of it as giving my work the chance that I think that it deserves. And I think a lot of artists struggle with that, especially, you know, because when you're creating, on the one hand, you're like, okay, cool, I made a thing, I want people to hear it, see it, and enjoy it. And on the other hand, you're like, why would anyone care what I have to say? And I think this kind of dichotomy or this conflict kind of exists in all of us. And I think I'm just trying to not let that hold me back the way that it maybe did in the past. But yeah, that's kind of been my journey with songwriting and music. And I think that kind of brings you up to speed with where I am today and what I'm trying to do. I'm mostly just happy that I can give my music a little bit more attention and sort of focus on it in a different capacity than I ever have before. I'm super excited to be working with Mile High Sounds. I feel very inspired, and I think there's going to be a lot of great collaborations, and I can't wait to share the songs with you and to keep sharing this journey with you guys. If I forgot anything or you have any questions, you can leave a comment below and I will answer any of your questions in my next video. And in that next video, I want to go through my songwriting process and show you one of my new songs that I've been working on here in real time. So stay tuned for that. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you've enjoyed this video, then please hit the like button as well. It helps other people discover it too. In the meantime, stay safe. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.